is the Orange Zone, sponsored by Apex Entertainment.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Orange Zone podcast. That's Ashley Wenskoski. I am Samantha Croston, and this podcast is sponsored by Apex Entertainment. Hello, welcome, happy summer. Ashley, how we feeling?
Good. We're back. We took a little time off. Obviously, as you all know, if you're a Syracuse athletics fan, this really is the dead time before kind of August football camp gets started. Lacrosse has now ended, but we have had some major coaching news in the Syracuse women's lacrosse program.
Yeah, today and the next few weeks, anticipate some more lax talk because there's some exciting things happening in the international sphere and the pro sphere and even here right in Syracuse. So let's begin with that. We haven't on this podcast yet really discussed Kayla Treanor leaving Syracuse, nor the hiring of Regy THORPE as her replacement. So we're going to get into both of those things today. Let's talk Kayla Treanor leaving first, just to sort of wrap that up and tie up some loose ends here. She's leaving Syracuse to become the head coach at Penn State. The Nittany Lions were 7-9 this year, but they have advanced to consecutive NCAA semifinals in 2016 and 2017.
Yeah.
So not necessarily a powerhouse like Syracuse. However, I'm just going to say this to start, and then we can get into what she did here at SU. I think that for her, that's actually not the worst decision because honestly, I think Penn State, you'll get a lot more NIL money probably there than you would at Syracuse for women's lacrosse.
Yeah, I was going to say, not that the two programs always go hand in hand, but we've seen Penn State men's lacrosse really kick it up in the last few years, really the last decade. They've become a Final Four contender, a national top 10 some years. So the women's program sort of headed down that same road would make a lot of sense. And I don't think you can dispute that, of course, at a Big Ten school with the amount of money that goes through there, she will certainly have some resources to work with at Penn State.
I agree. She was named the third coach in Syracuse history 4 years ago. Just the third, which is pretty unbelievable if you think about it. Treanor led the Orange to consecutive Final Fours in 2023 and 2024. Her overall record was 59-24, but this last season, not the best. It was the Orange finished with a 10-9 record. They lost to Yale in the second round of the NCAA tournament. It was a young team. It was a team that was, I hate to use the word rebuilding year, but that's sort of how it felt. There were a lot of stars who had left. There were some ups and some good wins, memorable moments. At the same time, there was a horrific and equally memorable loss to Boston College, and then they lost to Yale in the second round in pretty, forgettable fashion.
Yeah, I think Kayla Treanor's time at Syracuse was interesting, right? Because it seems like she got them back into that championship weekend, Final Four discussion every year prior to this year. But it was a lot of almost and a lot of maybes and a lot of we just can't beat Boston College. It was like 80% of where it needed to be. I know this year, obviously, we talked about it, at length earlier in the season. Like you said, it was more of a rebuilding year. She had a lot of freshmen, a lot of sophomores on this team. You felt like if she were going to get it done here, it would have been last year or the year before when she had numerous seniors, numerous All-Americans, girls with more experience. But I think I was a little bit surprised to see this news just after this season because we don't know the details of what went on, if she was asked to leave or if she decided to leave or what happened there. But I wouldn't expect her to take the fault for what happened this year because, like we said, it was a young team. You can only do so much with a team where you're starting primarily sophomores.
I totally understand. And honestly, like you said, this is not a podcast that speculates and we don't know the details, but I feel like she left of her own accord. I honestly think she maybe wanted a fresh start. And I want to preface, I'm about to make a point here, but let me preface it by saying Kayla Treanor has already cemented an outstanding legacy at Syracuse. She could have not coached here for one day, and she would have had that legacy already because of her time here as a player. She starred here from 2013 to 2016. She earned first team All-American honors all 4 years, like as a freshman, the whole 9 yards, the only player in program history to do that. And she was a 3-time Tewaaraton Award finalist. That's remarkable, any way you slice it.
Yeah.
That being said, I do think that her time as a coach at Syracuse, to your point, is going to be highlighted by what could have been, not what was. You are right to say that she went to the Final Four a couple times, and that is where you want to see Syracuse women's lacrosse, is at championship weekend. But for a team that has never won a national title and still has not climbed that Mount Everest, of course, the fact that she wasn't able to get that done is going to be a part of her legacy too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can look at it, right? I hate to say that her time as a coach tarnished, like, her legacy in any sense. I don't think tarnished would be the right word, but I do feel like she was arguably the best Syracuse women's lacrosse player to ever play at Syracuse. And as a coach, the bottom line is I think a lot of people wanted it to be her, right? The storyline would have been fantastic if it was her, if she got Syracuse their first national championship ever. It was just, that would have felt like really right. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, that's not what happened, and she's going to move on. So I don't think it tarnished her legacy. It just does make it feel a little different. She was Syracuse's star. She was synonymous with Syracuse. Now she's going to go coach at Penn State for the foreseeable future. Maybe she coaches at Penn State forever. Maybe she bops around between a few different Power 4 coaching jobs. But it is interesting now just to view it from the lens that Kayla Treanor will no longer be solely synonymous with Syracuse. She is leading another big-time program right down the road.
It is really remarkable to think about. And I will say, like, 2024, in my mind, like, that is the one that got away.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, there were so many stars on that team. So like you said, not all of this is on her. There are a lot of players who graduated, and this year that was, if we're being honest, that was never in the cards. Like, you would need to see some of these players develop and get older to sort of get back to where Syracuse used to be. But that was the year to do it. Syracuse women's lacrosse was really, really good for a while.
Yeah.
And now they've had a little bit of a drop off. So at this point, I actually think it might be the best thing for everyone. You get somebody new in who quite honestly is different. And we'll get into this, but Kayla Treanor, an attacker, a star on the offensive end. Regy THORPE, defensive minded.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the kind of switch that you need for a program like this that I always thought has been, offensively creative, but has struggled at times on the defensive end and holding opponents to, let's say, less than 12 goals.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think you guys can tell us in the comments or, tell us your opinion on it, but I don't think you can blame John Wildhack for hiring her at the time, because if I'm John Wildhack, that's a really appealing, it's pretty much your star branded of Syracuse women's lacrosse, and she's available to hire. That makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, he did take somewhat of a flyer on her. She was quite young when he hired her, I believe late 20s. So I don't think you can look at it and say, like, this wasn't the right fit, it wasn't the right hire. The bottom line is that it just didn't get all the way there the way people wanted it to.
Here's the other thing. I don't blame Wildhack either, because she started her coaching career at Boston College. Charlotte North was a player there. I mean, you want to talk about, when you think about what could a coach do to show on their resume that they're suited for the job, you have to have really amazing players on the offensive end if you're the offensive coach. Charlotte North is the best player in women's college lacrosse. That's just it.
Right.
And Kayla Treanor coached her. Of course, that's amazing to have on your resume. She goes to BC. They win their first national title 2021. So she absolutely had all the accolades required, more than some people probably have as a coach in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But like you said, it just doesn't always work out that way once you're the head coach and you need time to figure out exactly how you're going to operate the program. All that to say, she is out. Regy THORPE is in as the fourth head coach in program history. Beyond that, it was just Lisa Miller, Gary Gate, and Kayla Treanor. Pretty insane. Lisa Miller, by the way, just to say this one so we can talk about it, the only non-orange head coach that they've had in this program. And that's something that's been on, at our minds recently.
Yeah.
Syracuse always, or a lot of the time, I guess I should say, goes for somebody in the orange family. And I think there are some mixed feelings and opinions about that amongst, fans and viewers and even us.
Yeah, I would be interested to know if this is a John Wildhack trait. Obviously, he is in charge of hiring these coaches directly. If it's somebody higher up, if it's the board of trustees, like where this stems from. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that it's Wildhack, because we've seen Wildhack make decisions based on somewhat, it is a factor, right? Having these coaches be alumni of Syracuse. The only one that doesn't go for in recent memory for the top 4 programs is Fran Brown, and I like to point out that Fran Brown called him. That is well documented. So John Wildhack, for better or for worse, whatever you think about it, he likes his pool of Orange alumni, and he has another one. And listen, for the record, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. You're having someone come in who knows the culture, who knows the area, who knows what it takes to get fans to buy into a program at Syracuse in this town. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just do find it interesting that he really does seem to skew this way.
I agree. Also, for the record, I like this hire, and we'll talk about that. And I think it's a good hire and one that makes sense. But you just do wonder, was anyone extended an offer who wasn't an Orange alum? For a while, we see you guys always on Twitter and on social media saying whatever it is that you want to say about who the next coach should be. This time around, that narrative was Joe Spallina. It sort of made sense. He has a daughter who's about to be a freshman and play at Clemson, but everybody kind of thought if he came to Syracuse that, maybe he could, make her transfer, back and come back to Syracuse because she was originally committed to play here. And while he, is down on Long Island, he obviously knows all there is to know about New York and the Northeast, has immense connections, and had the sort of intensity that I think a lot of people at Syracuse like. He honestly had that sort of Fran Brown style of intensity. Not to say Regy Thorpe didn't, but I'm just curious who got an offer. We'll never know those sorts of things, but you just wonder who else, was extended an offer in this situation.
Yeah, Joe Spallina was intriguing, like you said, because of his experience, because of the area, Long Island, such a hotbed for Syracuse women's lacrosse. At the same time, it was interesting, everything that went on. Was it last year or 2 years ago that Stony Brook came here and he was complaining about the mud, and that was a whole thing. And then Alexis Spallina, like you said, his youngest daughter commits to Kayla Treanor and then decommits and goes to Clemson. So there has been some interesting, I think, intricacies with Joe Spallina. While obviously his sons play on the men's lacrosse team and star on the men's lacrosse team in the form of Joey Spallina, there's been some ins and outs there. So I would like to know if he was like on the list for Wild Hack to call.
Same. I totally agree. But listen, let me also say this. Regy Thorpe, really, really great resume here. He, like I said, was a Syracuse alum, and he even was quoted as saying, "I'm excited to come back home to Syracuse University. This is my dream job." That's a good start. I love hearing anybody say that. He was a former All-American defenseman at Syracuse, won a natty with SU in 1993 as a captain, and he was a graduate of Jordan Elbridge High School. He is, a native to the area. He spent a decade here with the Syracuse women's lacrosse team as the associate head coach with Gary Gait, so expect to see some of those kinds of tendencies and maybe a little bit of Gary Gait's style. But beyond that, he spent the last 4 seasons as an assistant coach at the University of Florida with a focus on defense, and Florida went 20-4 this past season, tying the program record of 20 wins. They also made the Final Four for the second consecutive season. That's not bad.
Yeah, there's a lot that intrigues me about Thorpe and about this hire, because you just said it. He spent a decade here coaching on the women's lacrosse team under Gary Gait. So this is, you want to say familiar territory? That's about as familiar as you can get. You spend a decade under, the same job that you're now going to ascend to, learning under the guy who had it, and a guy who's still here. If he still wants to call up Gary Gait, if he wants to meet with Gary Gait, he's now right across the hall or wherever their offices are. So that to me can only be a good thing. And of course, I presume that he would come highly recommended by Gary Gait, right? Or that just seems like it wouldn't fall into place. So I think the fact that he was here for that amount of time is fantastic. Like you said, they made 9 NCAA tournament appearances in that span, 6 Final Fours. Like, that's incredible. We talked a lot about how Kayla Treanor, saw Syracuse through the almosts and the maybes and the so close. Well, Thorpe has been so close, and so now maybe he already has that experience to push it over the edge and being a little older. Also, outside of Syracuse, Florida, the University of Florida women's lacrosse team, I think is one of the most intriguing women's lacrosse programs in the country right now, alongside Clemson and alongside a few other programs. But let's face it, the SEC has not been the premier lacrosse program in, nationally throughout college athletics. And Florida has really made their mark the last couple of years, and he was a big part of that.
He absolutely was. The other thing to point out when you think about him is that he's a defensive-minded guy, right? Kayla Treanor is someone who is offense through and through. And I know I say this a lot, but I really believe that there's a reason why the saying is offense wins games, defense wins championships. If Syracuse has been almost and so close a million times, then you really need to change something. You actually might need to change a lot of things, because it seemed like they were so close, right? And being at championship weekend, it appears like they're so close. But if you could never get past Boston College, you're really not that close at all. You might need to change a couple things here. I don't think it was a matter of just 1 or 2 little tweaks. You have to figure out a way to get Boston College. And now, of course, UNC too, and, a host of other teams who are also in the mix at the top there.
Yeah.
Syracuse is no longer that top contender or even number 2. They're going to have to work back to that point. So I think that having somebody who, A, has the experience, like you said, is a little older, has been through the almost with Syracuse, but more than any of that is really focused on defense and making that part of Syracuse's game better. I honestly think you might see a totally different style of team, and that may not be a bad thing.
I agree with you. That interests me in terms of Syracuse women's lacrosse because you just said it. We were saying it sort of earlier this season on this podcast. Like, at some point, if you're going to get somewhere, the bottom line is you have to beat Boston College. You have to take down, it's like David and Goliath. If you don't ever get past it, then you know what I mean. So Thorpe is obviously going to try to do that, and we'll see what pans out. But I don't think it was a bad time for the shakeup because while Kayla Treanor was only the head coach for 4 years, 4 years in college athletics is a long time to, I guess, run with the same narrative that we were sort of running with, right?
I think that it's also just enough time to see whether something's working or not. We talk frequently about the fact that even when we think about, Adrian Autry and whatnot, hey, give a coach a few years. Lawrence Moten, biggest proponent of that. Hey, give a coach a few years.
Right.
You have to see how things develop. 4 years, you sort of see how things are developing, And here's the other thing, like, especially with a name like Kayla Treanor, she, I think herself was such a draw that if she was not able to recruit the right people who needed to be here in order to make the program better, it's like, who is? Like, by the time 4 years had passed, I think with a guy like Regy Thorpe, like you said, he's been to a couple of different places. Maybe he's bringing some people over from Florida. I mean, who the hell knows? But I think him having connections in other places also could end up being a good thing. Like, don't be surprised if you see that.
Yeah, 4 years it's enough time to, as a head coach, have your entire recruiting cycle, right? You've had a full 4 year, your freshmen are graduating. You've had a full cycle of recruiting. And I think in a sport like lacrosse, obviously that's enough time. Sometimes this just brought this to mind to me. It's a little off topic, but like sometimes I think about how Dino Babers was here for 8 years and it still blows my mind. That is an eternity.
8 years.
An eternity. We won't get into that right now.
For the record, great guy. We always say it, so don't come at us.
But,
love that dude.
Oh my God, 8 years.
8 years. And that gets into a whole larger discussion we don't have time for since we have 6 minutes left that we're able to continue talking.
Got to go to West Genesee baseball.
Also that, we do have day jobs, y'all. We do have day jobs. But it is interesting, right? It's like, if you have one down year, who knows what's enough to fire somebody or what's not? And maybe we'll have a whole episode about that, because how is it, I just have to say this, that Dino Babers can stay here for 8 years and the New York Knicks are firing Tom Thibodeau?
Yeah, obviously like a different caliber of a different playing field, but the Dino Babers 8 years thing, I just want to let everybody know that I think about that frequently, and especially in this day and age of college athletics, how egregious that was in some
You think
senses.
he should have been fired much sooner?
It was 8 years.
Yeah.
And I know there's going to be people in the comments. I know Garrett Schrader gets hurt. He got by because he had the great year with Dungy, the 10 wins. I know what happened. I'm just saying 8 years as a head coach with really not producing anything tangible. You weren't in the ACC conversation. You weren't in, 8 years is a really long time. That's all.
All right, we're getting back on track. I just had to hear what she had to say on that.
Thank you and good night.
All right, so a couple other things actually we wanted to just point out as far as women's lacrosse. Emma Muchnick and some former Orange players on the Syracuse women's lacrosse team were recently invited to the USA Lacrosse training camps that is happening right now. It began yesterday. We're recording this on a Tuesday, and it's going Monday through Wednesday. So that is really a cool opportunity. If Emma Muchnick and some of the others are able to get through and make it to the final cuts, they will be able to represent Team USA, which is a really big honor. So look out for Emma Muchnick, who's a rising senior, but there's actually 5 current and former Orange who are going to take part in the camp. Also on the list, we have Katie Goodale? Mm-hmm. Goodale, Kate Mashesky, and Delaney Schweitzer, who, as you all know, was not with Syracuse at the end, but still really awesome. And another thing to just point out, Emily Harrischuk is one of 26 players invited to a Sixes training camp ahead of this summer's World Games in China. So again, very cool that you're having some, former Orange, and even, to be a rising senior like Emma Muchnick and be included in that conversation, it's a big deal.
Yeah, to have current and former Orange players like Kate Mashevsky, who was fantastic here, Delaney Schweitzer was fantastic here before she went to Northwestern, just to see those players, I guess, make their mark on sort of the national and world stage for women's lacrosse is obviously only a positive thing for your program in terms of recruiting and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. So again, good luck to all of those ladies. We also wanted to point out that the Haudenosaunee team, or the Haudenosaunee Nationals, announced their roster for the Pan American Lacrosse Association Women's Qualifier. That's a whole lot of words. Let me explain what that means. That is a qualifier that takes place from June 26th to the 30th in Florida. The top 4 teams from that qualifier, they will qualify and go on to play in the 2026 World Lacrosse Championships held in Japan. And there are some CNYers on that roster. Sierra Cockrell, Allie Trice, Paige Crandall, who played over at Lemoyne, and Liz Bevel, who is the Lemoyne head coach. She will be one of the coaches on this team. Again, really, really cool. This is how you grow a sport like this. I know that for a while, people were saying that lacrosse was the fastest growing sport in America. That's just not true. It's actually pickleball by a mile.
Everybody loves pickleball.
Everybody loves pickleball. Everybody loves pickleball. But I think that for a small sport like this, that was really kind of a big deal in the Northeast, in order to grow it, you need more people to see it and to have exposure to it. So to be able to be a part of this, I would really say trendsetters who are able to play on the national stage and help to give the sport exposure, that's how you grow it. There's really no other way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it'll be great to watch. I think even for, Central New York has so many young girls and young women that want to play lacrosse. New York as a whole, Long Island, we talk about it all the time. For those young girls to be able to watch maybe some of their idols, maybe some of the Emma Muchnick, who currently plays on the Syracuse women's lacrosse team, on these national and worldwide stages, is very impactful to them. And I think that goes a long way in terms of, like you said, growing the sport, and for Syracuse itself, recruiting.
Another thing that we do not do on this podcast is overpromise and then underdeliver, but I'm just going to say, without promising it, that we are trying to have some of those ladies on the podcast in the near future. So hopefully we can have some sort of, live interviews, and expect to see some kinds of things like that as we head into the summer months. Thanks as always for joining us. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Once again, this podcast is sponsored by Apex Entertainment. We will see you back here next Tuesday with any more Orange updates that we have. Thanks for joining us.